According to spoilers for The Bold and the Beautiful, Matthew Atkinson will return to Los Angeles as Thomas Forrester in a few weeks. We know the former villain will return in September 2025, but it's unclear why. Is it work-related, or another desperate attempt to persuade Hope Logan to marry him? Here's what's coming up next on Bold and Beautiful, with spoilers below. A lot has changed since Thomas left. When word spread that Thomas Forrester was coming to Los Angeles, many assumed that Rich Forrester's son was returning to try to derail Hope Logan's wedding or to attend his parents'. According to Bold and the Beautiful teasers, Thomas may return to Forrester Creations to do business. When Thomas left town, he quit his job at Forrester Creations and stopped creating for Hope for the future. Thomas hasn't been to Los Angeles since Carter, and Hope took over the family business and changed the regime. He's in for an unpleasant revelation when he walks into the boardroom. Hope not only refused to marry Thomas, but she also became engaged to someone else after he left, with whom she had much less history. If Thomas Forrester isn't bothered by her engagement to Carter Walton, he should be. To make matters worse, Carter took not just the love of his life, but also his family's business and birthright. When Thomas Forrester returns, Carter may want to sleep with one eye open. Thomas confronts Carter. So yet, it is unclear why Thomas is returning home. But we are excited to see the fireworks. Do you believe Thomas will confront Carter Walton, or try to get revenge on the man who stole his family's company? Should Carter be worried? Thomas had always been an ambitious man, motivated by a need to prove himself, not only to his father, Rich Forrester, or to the history of Forrester Creations, but also to himself. He'd spent years pushing his way out of the shadow of his previous blunders, the manipulations and plots that had earned him the title of villain in the eyes of those he cared about. He'd worked hard to redeem himself, to show Hope that he was more than the man who had deceived her before. However, it appeared that redemption was only temporary. He left Los Angeles with a broken spirit. Hope's rejection had pierced his heart, and her unwillingness to marry him had left a lingering hurt. He'd proposed to her, poured out his heart, hoping that their common history, as turbulent as it was, would be enough to unite them. But she replied no, her eyes filled with pity and resolution, and Thomas escaped to Paris, hoping the distance would ease the hurt. It had not. Now, as he walked off the plane and into the familiar commotion of LAX, the memories returned. The city had not changed significantly, but everything else had. Forrester Creations, the behemoth his family had built, had changed. He'd heard the tales, the murmurs that had reached him across the Atlantic. Carter Walton and Hope had staged a takeover, grabbing control of the corporation while Thomas was overseas licking his wounds. His birthright, the heritage he had poured his heart and passion into, had been taken away. Worse, Hope was engaged to Carter, a man Thomas hardly knew, who had swooped in and claimed everything Thomas ever desired. The cab ride to his former flat was a whirl of palm trees and traffic, with the driver's conversation barely audible. Thomas glanced out the window, his thoughts whirling. Why did he come back? He wasn't really certain. Part of him wanted to believe it was for work, that Forrester Creations needed him, and that his concepts for hope for the future may still have an impact. But deep down he knew the truth. It was hope. There was always hope. The flat was exactly as he'd left it, a time capsule from his previous life. Sketches cluttered the desk, half-finished concepts for garments that would never see the runway. A photograph of him and Hope, shot during a rare moment of delight, rested on the mantel, collecting dust. He lifted it up, stroking his thumb across her face. She was smiling in the photo, her eyes full of possibilities. That was before everything fell apart. Thomas placed down the photograph and looked away, his jaw hard. He couldn't afford to be lost in nostalgia. He had to confront the truth about what awaited him at Forrester Creations. The company had been his life's work, where he'd channeled his creativity and passion. To learn that Carter, of all people, had taken control was a more profound betrayal than Hope's rejection. Carter, who had no history with the Forresters and no claim to their legacy, had worked his way into the core of the family business, and Hope's heart. The next morning, Thomas dressed carefully, selecting a fitted suit that oozed confidence he didn't have. He needed to dress the part and stroll into Forrester Creations as if he still belonged. The structure loomed before him, its gleaming glass exterior reflecting the morning sun. It was a tribute to his family's past, but stepping inside felt like entering a stranger's home. The office was bustling with activity, but the vibe was different. The warmth and sense of family that formerly distinguished the place were no longer present. Employees looked at him with a mix of interest and dread. Thomas ignored them and made his way to the boardroom. He did not knock. He did not need to. Carter Walton sat at the head of the table, surrounded by papers and a laptop, his posture serene yet commanding. Hope was also present, standing by his side with her hand resting on his shoulder. The sight of them together was a punch in the gut, but Thomas forced himself to maintain a neutral demeanor. "Thomas," Hope replied, her voice gentle and reserved. "You're back." "Yeah," he answered, his tone tight. "Heard there were some changes around here." Carter stood and extended a hand. "Nice to meet you, Thomas. We didn't expect you." Thomas disregarded the outstretched hand, his gaze narrowing. "Clearly. It appears that you have made yourself comfortable." Hope's expression clenched, but she did not answer. Carter, ever the diplomat, waved toward a chair. "Why aren't you sitting? We can catch you up." "I'd rather stand," Thomas replied, his voice frigid. "I want to know what the hell happened to my family's company." The room fell silent, with tension thick enough to choke on. Carter and Hope exchanged glances before speaking. Forrester Creations required a new direction. "We recognized an opportunity to propel the organization ahead, and seized it." "You took it," Thomas said, his voice low and threatening. "You have taken my family's legacy, my designs, my work. And you?" He looked to Hope, his eyes filled with pain. "You let him." Hope flinched, but she maintained his gaze. "Thomas, this was not about you. It was about what was best for the business. For everyone. Everyone except me," he replied. "You did not simply take the firm, Hope. You took everything." The words hung in the air, thick with accusations. Carter walked forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Thomas, I understand that you are upset, but this isn't personal. It is business." "Business?" Thomas laughed bitterly, the sound echoing throughout the room. "Carter, you stole my birthright. You snatched the lady I adore. And you are telling me it isn't personal?" Hope's eyes welled with tears, but she did not speak. Thomas wanted to shake her and make her realize what she had done, but he knew it was pointless. She had made her decision, and it wasn't him. The incident had Thomas reeling, but that was merely the beginning. He spent the following few days trying to figure out where he fit in at a company that no longer seemed like his. He examined the new designs, the improvements Carter and Hope had made, and found them insufficient. They were competent, yes, but they lacked the soul and fire that Thomas had always given to his job. He wanted to fight to reclaim what was his, but each step forward felt like wading through quicksand. At night, alone in his flat, he felt the weight of his loneliness. He thought about his son, Douglas, who was still in Paris with his mother. He thought of his father, Ridge, who had been too preoccupied with his own life to recognize Thomas's anguish. And he kept thinking about Hope, her face haunting his dreams. Thomas was unable to sleep one evening and ended up at a bar, nursing an unwanted whiskey. The bartender, a grizzled man with warm eyes, noted his demeanor. "Have you had a rough day?" he asked. "Rough life," Thomas mumbled. The bartender nodded and poured him another. "You look like a man with a story." Thomas did not answer at first, but the alcohol softened his tongue. He told the bartender everything. About Hope, Forrester Creations, and the betrayal that led him to his knees. The words came out raw and unfiltered, and when he finished he felt emptier than before. "You know," the bartender remarked, leaning against the counter, "sometimes you have to let go of what is gone. This does not imply you should quit battling. It just indicates that you are fighting for something else." Thomas wanted to believe him, but letting go of Hope meant letting go of himself. She was knit into the fabric of his being, and her rejection left a wound that would not heal. Nonetheless, the bartender's words remained with him, a glimmer of light in the darkness. The days stretched into weeks, and Thomas immersed himself in his job, anxious to prove that he still belonged at Forrester Creations. He drew designs late into the night, each more daring than the next, in a frantic bid to retake his place in the world. But every time he presented them to the board, he saw skepticism in their eyes, Carter's cool dismissal, Hope's tentative support. It was not enough. One afternoon as he was leaving the office, Hope caught up with him. "Thomas, wait," she said, her voice gentle. He turned, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you want, Hope?" I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you," she murmured, her gaze fixed on his. "Thomas, I care about you. I always will." The words were like a dagger, twisting in his chest. "You care about me," he insisted, his voice lifeless. "But you love him." Hope did not refute it, and her silence was more devastating than any rejection. Thomas turned to walk away, her voice resonating in his ears. As September progressed into October, Thomas began to realize the reality. Los Angeles was no longer his home. Forrester Creations was not his legacy, and Hope was a dream he had pursued for too long. The realization was a long, painful burn, but it was also a sense of liberation. He began making arrangements to depart, to return to Paris or perhaps somewhere else, where he could start anew. He thought of Douglas, of creating a life for his kid free of the shadows of his past. He recalled the bartender's words about battling for something else. On his final day in Los Angeles, Thomas stood outside Forrester Creations, looking up at the building one more time. The sun was setting, creating long shadows on the pavement. He felt the weight of his mistakes and losses, but he also felt something new. A spark of resolve, a drive to forge a new path. He had no idea what the future contained, but for the first time in a long time he was not scared. Thomas Forrester was more than his faults and heartache. He was a man with a story, and he was eager to begin a new chapter.